Oh, hi. You came back. Yes, it must have gone okay then. Thanks for coming back for part 2 of A Bushy Tale. Just before we get on, just to warn you that over here, if you can see it, that's my assistant, Georgia Brown, who will probably walk right across the screen at some point. But let's see if we can get the story told in the meantime. So, whether you're listening to this now, in the afternoon, or whether you're going to be saving it for a bedtime story tonight, I hope you enjoy part 2 of A Bushy Tale. If you remember, yesterday we met our hero Squish the red squirrel, and we learned about the fact that everyone was worried about the greys. Today we're going to find out a little bit more. So here we go with chapter 3, in which we find out more about the greys. No one really knew where the greys came from. There was a time, a long time ago, when the reds were the only kind of squirrel. They lived happily gathering nuts and acorns. Nobody really bothered them, and they bothered nobody. But Squish remembered one day when his father sat him down, just as he had done with Squish's older brothers and sisters. "Squish," he said, in the voice he used when he wanted to say something serious. "You must watch out for the greys." "What's the greys?" Squish had asked. He'd only heard the word greys used about animals which eat grass, like deer. He hoped his father wasn't warning him about animals like that, because he quite liked deer. They seemed very gentle animals who just like wandering about, nibbling plants. "The greys are other squirrels. They don't have red fur like us. Sometimes they have bits of red on them, but they are mostly grey." "Is it like how White Tip has a bit of white on her tail?" Squish asked. "Not really," Magnus answered. "White Tip is a red with a tiny bit of white. The greys are just grey." "With bits of red?" "Yes, Squish, with bits of red." "Why do I need to watch out for them?" "Well, young Squish," his father said, "they say that the greys are not very nice squirrels." "What, like Scamp when he's in a bad mood?" Squish remembered a time when Scritch had put some spiky horse chestnut shells in Scamp's bed, and Scamp had been in a very bad mood. "No, Squish. Worse than that. Everyone has bad moods sometimes, but are happy the rest of the time. From what I have heard, the greys are in a bad mood all the time." "Why? What are they cross about?" "No one knows. They just are." "Maybe they don't like being grey when we're lovely and red," Squish suggested. "I don't know," Magnus replied with his thinking face on. "Look at the finches. The greens and the golds and the chaffinches all have different colour feathers, but they seem to get on. There are different families of deer and owls and sparrows, but they live side by side. I don't think the greys are like that because of the colour of their fur. I've heard it said that the greys are selfish." Squish knew all about selfish. He'd been taught not to be selfish from when he was a very small squirrel. His parents had taught their children that it didn't matter how big and tasty the nuts and acorns were that they found. They should always share them and not keep all the best ones for themselves. After all, they were told, one day you might not be able to find many nice ones, and you would be glad if others shared with you. "Why are they selfish?" Squish asked. "Don't they want to share?" "They don't want to share with us," his father explained. "I believe there are lots more greys than there are reds, and so the greys want all the nuts and acorns for themselves." "But that's silly," Squish said. "There's usually lots of nuts and acorns. There's always enough to go round everybody." "The greys don't care. They're not bothered if there are more nuts than they need. They just want to have them all. They don't want anyone else to have them. But there is another reason you must watch out for the greys." Squish was getting quite scared now. Selfish squirrels who were always in a bad mood and wanted all the nuts and acorns are bad enough. What else could there be? "Greys carry an illness," Magnus told him. "You know how you got the sniffles that time and had to stay in bed? It's like that, but much, much worse. I've heard other reds say this illness does not affect the greys, but if we reds catch it, we go straight up the biggest tree." That is why, young Squish, if you see a grey, you must stay away from it, and you must come and tell me. Do you understand?" Squish understood. He was very young when his father told him this, and did not want to go up the biggest tree yet. He and his brothers and sisters often played a game called "What Would You Do If You See a Grey?" This usually involved running up a tree very quickly. Their parents watched them play this game and were glad they played it. Squish heard his parents talking about it one day. "Do you think the Greys will come to the woods?" his mother asked in a very little voice that Squish had not heard before. Squish's mother was usually the one who did all the telling off if young squirrels were naughty, and never sounded scared of anything. "I don't know," Magnus replied, holding his wife's paw tightly. "I've heard that they are getting closer. I'm glad we have taught the children what to do." Squish thought about this sometimes when he was out on his own. They are getting closer. Sometimes if he heard a rustling in the bushes, his heart started to beat faster, and he worried it might be a grey. But it was usually a hedgehog coming out blinking from its deep sleep, or a young fox looking for something good to eat. But he thought about his mother's little voice and how serious his father had sounded, and always tried to be careful. But if the Greys were getting closer, they'd not come to the woods yet. The day the squirrels heard the Greys were coming is when our story really begins. And if I were you, I would ask for the light to be left on for a while, because parts of the story might be a bit scary. And Chapter 4, in which everyone thinks the Greys have arrived. No one could really agree on who saw the first grey. Professor Otis, who taught the young animals to read and who should have been reliable, said he saw a grey near the woods one night when he was out flying. He said he saw the grey sitting looking towards the woods. "It looked like it was waiting for something," Professor Otis said. "I don't know what it was waiting for." Sorry about the bad voices. Two bluetits tweeted that they had seen a grey sitting in the shadow of a large old pine tree. "We don't know what it was doing," they tweeted. "It was just sitting there. It might have been an old root that looked like a grey." A young fox friend of Swish's, whose name in fox was Gruff, but who was known as Colin to everyone who didn't speak fox, said he saw the grey earlier that same evening. "I saw it running towards the pine woods," Colin said. "I don't know why it was running." Several small hedgehogs, whose names need not bother us right now because they were very clearly making up their story to impress everyone, swore they had chased away 3 enormous greys. "They had big sticks and everything," the hedgehog said, "but when they saw us they ran away." White Tip knocked on Squish's dray to say that some of her friends were saying that the Greys were already in the woods, but were hiding. Squish really wanted to say to her, "Don't worry, White Tip, you'll be safe with me." But somehow it came out as, "I don't think they are." It was obvious that White Tip was frightened by the thought of the Greys, and so were most of the other squirrels. It was clear that if the Greys were really very near, then something had to be done. One evening, Swish's father and some of the other older squirrels met to talk about what to do. They met in the dray Squish shared with his parents and his brothers and sisters, but all the young squirrels were sent to a dray in the next tree for the night. Squish tried to argue. "We want to do something," he said. "I'm sorry, Squish," Magnus said. "I know you all want to help, but there are things which do not concern young squirrels." Squish could see that his father was very serious, so he went with his brothers and sisters to the next tree. Squish was tempted to stay inside the dray because this was the dray where White Tip lived. But much as he would usually have liked White Tip's company, this time Squish wanted to be on his own. He was also very curious about what the older squirrels were discussing. So while Scamp, Scritch and their sisters played inside the dray with the other young squirrels, Squish sat outside on a branch and tried to listen to the snatches of the older squirrels' conversation as they drifted over on the evening breeze. "Protect the acorns," he heard, and "mustn't lose the trees." But the older squirrels were talking in low voices, so it was hard to hear. The other young squirrels were also making a lot of noise as they played inside the dray. After a while, Scamp came out and sat with him. Scamp was laughing and had clearly been enjoying himself. You should have seen it, Squish," he said, stopping every few words to laugh again. "We told White Tip that the Greys would cut off the white tip of her tail, and she started crying. She's such a baby." Squish was suddenly angry. It was bad enough that the Greys had made everything so serious, but he hated the idea of his brothers upsetting White Tip. "You leave White Tip alone," he snapped. "You shouldn't tease her like that." Squish did not argue with his brother very often, and this made Scamp suddenly stop laughing. "Don't worry, Squish," he said. "I know you're scared, but Dad and the other older squirrels won't let the Greys hurt you. Anyway, Scritch and I will fight them off." Squish didn't feel like replying. The way he felt at that moment, he didn't think he needed anyone to fight for him. Scamp went back inside, muttering something about sulking squirrels. Squish sat for a while trying to calm down. Everything was suddenly getting very serious, and he felt like the world he had known had been taken away and replaced with a scarier world he didn't like. He was so lost in thought that he didn't realise that he was no longer alone. "Scamp said you stuck up for me," White Tip said. "Thank you." "That's okay," Squish replied. Now, White Tip was sitting next to him. He couldn't think of anything else to say. "Your brother's an idiot," White Tip said. "He just makes jokes all the time. He isn't clever like you." "I'm not clever," Squish said. "I'm a dreamer. That's what my dad says." "Well, I think that's the same thing. You think about things," White Tip said. "I think you should be over there with the older squirrels." "The older squirrels will sort it out," Squish said. "They'll know what to do." "I still think you should be there. It's like nobody cares how we feel," White Tip said. Squish thought for a moment. "It's not that they don't care," he said. "They're just worried about something and they won't tell us what it is. My dad says there are things we young squirrels don't need to know." "Well, I think we should know. I'm scared of the Greys, Squish. We all are. Can you find out what they're saying?" White Tip touched Squish's paw with her own for a second. For that second, Squish felt like he could fight all the Greys by himself. Before he even knew he was doing it, Squish had jumped from one tree to the next. It was a very big jump for a small squirrel, but Squish balanced himself with his tail as he had been taught and leaped into the air. Whenever he made a big jump like this, he always thought that this must be how the birds feel where they fly, and how wonderful it must feel to soar into the sky. Squirrels don't have wings, and so have to make do with jumping, but knowing White Tip was watching made Squish feel like he was flying too. He landed neatly on a branch and sat outside his family's dray, listening very quietly. This is what he heard. "We don't even know what the Greys want, Magnus," one older squirrel was saying. "They might want to be friends. We should talk to them." "I'm sorry, Russet Coat," Swish's father said, "but if you think that, you're a fool. You know we can't let the Greys near us. Imagine if the illness they carry starts to spread. Anyway, we do know what the Greys want. They want our nuts and our acorns, all of them, and you know what that means." "But what about the ones we have hidden?" another squirrel asked. "They are squirrels too," Swish's father said. "They know about hiding nuts. I know the other animals laugh at us and say we have forgotten where we put them." "Shh," Russet Coat said. "Someone might hear." "There's nobody here but squirrels, Russ. But you are right. We don't want the other animals to know the squirrel's secret." This was enough for Squish. The squirrels had a secret. He waited to hear if his father would say what the secret was, but he started talking about acorns using big words Squish had never heard before. As quietly as he could, Squish made the leap back to another tree. White Tip was waiting for him. "What are they saying?" White Tip asked. "I couldn't hear," Squish said. Even though he'd wanted to tell White Tip what he had heard, he needed time to think about it. He also quite liked the idea of having a secret of his own. Squish and the other young squirrels spent the night at the next door tree. The older squirrels carried on talking until long after the young squirrels' bedtime, but Squish found it hard to sleep, even though the dray was comfortable and warm and he was very tired. What was the squirrel's secret? And what did it have to do with acorns and the Greys? He decided that as soon as he could, he would find out. And you'll have to come back tomorrow to find out yourselves. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you tomorrow.